There is a rule in the village of Oguta that every child learns before they learn to walk. Never enter the forest after midnight. Not because of animals, not because of the dark, because of what lives there. And for 17 years, Ada had obeyed that rule, without question, without hesitation, without even thinking about it, the way you obey gravity, the way you breathe. But that was before she found out her sister had been breaking it every single night. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm about to tell you, because what happened to Ada Okonkwo in the village of Oguta is the kind of story that doesn't leave you. It sits behind your eyes when you try to sleep. It waits for you in the silence between 1:59 and 2 a.m. And if you've ever shared a room with someone you love, if you've ever watched them sleep and thought, I would do anything to keep them safe, then you already understand exactly why Ada did what she did, even if what she did was the most dangerous thing a person can do in Oguta, even if what she saw in that forest was something she can never unsee. Stay with me, because this story doesn't start where you think it starts.
Ada and Ne were 2 years apart in age and about 100 years in personality. Ada was the cautious one, the one who checked the door twice, who walked home before dark, who never, not once in her life, went anywhere without telling someone where she was going. She was the kind of girl who believed in rules, not because she was afraid of punishment, but because she genuinely believed rules existed for a reason. That someone, somewhere, had made them because something had gone wrong before. Ne was different. Ne laughed too loud at funerals. Ne wore red on days you weren't supposed to. Ne asked elders questions they didn't want to answer. And when they told her to stop, she'd smile that slow, easy smile of hers and say, "But why not, though?" Their mother used to say, God sent Ada first, so she'd be ready to clean up whatever Ne broke. They weren't just sisters. They were each other's opposites. And somehow, because of that, they were each other's best friends. Which is why Ada noticed. She noticed the way you notice when something that has always been there isn't.
It started small. Ne stopped eating dinner. Not dramatically, not in the way that would have raised alarms. She just pushed her food around the plate and said she wasn't hungry. Once, twice, every night for 2 weeks. Her eyes started to look far away, like she was watching something in the distance that no one else could see. Ada would call her name, and Ine would blink, slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water, and say, Sorry, I'm here. But she wasn't. Not really. The laughter stopped. That's when Ada knew something was truly wrong, because Ine's laugh was like a radio signal. Constant, easy to find. And then one day, the frequency just vanished. Ada asked her. Of course she asked her. Nothing is wrong, Ine said. I'm just tired. Tired of what? Of everything. And she said it so quietly, so flatly, that Ada felt a cold thing move through her chest. She told herself it was nothing. Teenage moods, the Harmattan season, maybe a boy. She told herself that until the night she woke up at 2:14 a.m. to use the bathroom. and found Nne's bed empty.
She checked the bathroom. Empty. The kitchen. Empty. The compound. She pushed open the back door and stood in the moonlight and called her sister's name into the dark. Nothing. She waited 20 minutes, telling herself there was an explanation, that Nne had maybe gone to a neighbor's house, that maybe she'd stepped out for air. At 2:47 a.m., Nne walked back through the door. Her feet were dirty. Her wrapper was damp at the hem. Her eyes were, and this is the part Ada could never fully explain, too calm. Not the calm of someone who'd just taken a walk, the calm of someone who had been emptied. "Where were you?" Ada whispered. "Nowhere," said Nne, and walked past her and went to sleep. Ada stood in the dark kitchen for a long time after. She didn't know it yet, but she had just seen the beginning of something she would spend the next 8 nights trying to understand, and one terrifying night trying to survive.
Here is what Ada did next. She didn't confront Nneke again. She didn't tell their mother. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she watched. For 1 week, she lay in bed every night and pretended to sleep. She slowed her breathing. She kept her eyes at a crack. She waited. And every single night at exactly 2 a.m., not 1:58, not 2:04, exactly 2 a.m., Nneke would sit up. She wouldn't look around. She wouldn't check if Ada was awake. She would simply sit up like a machine that had received a signal, stand, wrap her cloth around her, and walk out. Ada timed it. She documented it in a small notebook with a pen she kept under her pillow. 7 nights, 7 entries, each one identical. 2 a.m., she gets up, she leaves, she comes back between 2:40 and 2:55. Feet dirty, eyes wrong, no explanation. On the 7th night, Ada wrote one more line. "Tomorrow, I follow her."
Now, I need you to understand something about Oguta Forest. The elders don't just warn people away from it the way you warn a child away from a hot stove. They don't just say, "It's dangerous." They say, and these are their exact words, passed down for generations, "The forest at night is not for the living. What walks there has no name you should speak. And if you go there and something sees you, truly sees you, you will not come back the same. Not you won't survive, not you'll be harmed. You will not come back the same." Ada had heard this her whole life. She believed it the way you believe in things you've never tested, theoretically, safely. She was about to test it. On the 8th night, she didn't sleep at all. She lay still and waited with her heart in her throat and her lantern already prepped beside the bed, wick trimmed, oil filled, matchbox tucked into her jacket. Pocket. She had worn her shoes to bed. She told herself she was ready. She wasn't, but she went anyway.
At exactly 2 a.m., Nne sat up. Ada didn't move. Nne stood, wrapped her cloth around herself like a woman in a trance, and walked out of the room. Ada counted to 30. Then she lit her lantern, careful, not too bright, and followed. The path Nne took was not a path Ada recognized.
That was the first wrong thing. Ada had grown up in Oguta. She had walked every road, every shortcut, every edge of that village 1,000 times. She knew where the cassava farms ended and the bush began. But the direction Ene was walking, Ada did not know that path. It was like Ene was going through somewhere that wasn't supposed to exist. Ada followed with her lantern held low, using Ene's white wrapper as her guide in the dark. She kept 20 paces back. She kept her breathing shallow. She placed each foot carefully, silently, terrified of a snap of a twig. The air changed. That was the second wrong thing.
It went from the warm, dusty harmattan air she knew to something colder, heavier, the kind of air that presses on your skin like a wet cloth, the kind that carries a smell, not rotting exactly, more like old, like earth that has been closed and sealed for a very long time. The trees around her began to change. The sparse bush gave way to taller trunks, older ones. Their roots clawed up from the ground like hands. Moss covered everything. And that wasn't right, because Oguta didn't have moss like this. Oguta didn't have moss like this. She was somewhere else. And yet, Ene kept walking, straight ahead, steady, unhurried, like she came here every night. Because she did. Ada nearly stopped, nearly turned around. Every instinct in her body, every cell shaped by 17 years of never entered the forest was screaming at her to stop, to turn, to run. She kept going. Because that was Ene's white wrapper up ahead. That was her voice she could now hear, very low, almost a hum, and something was responding to it. Something Ada couldn't see yet. Something just beyond where the lantern light died.
She stopped behind a tree, pressed herself against its bark, rough and damp under her palms, and looked around the edge. And that's when she saw them. They were tall, too tall. Not the way a tall person is tall, not measured in feet and inches and proportion. They were tall the way shadows are tall when the light hit them wrong, like they could decide how much of themselves to show. 3 of them, standing at the edge of a small clearing, still. Their shapes were wrong, in the way that takes a moment to register. Long where they shouldn't be long, bent in places nothing bends. And their eyes, red, not the red of fire, not warm at all. The red of something that has looked at the darkness for so long, it no longer remembers what light was for. And Ine was standing in the center of that clearing. Just standing there, facing them. One of the things stepped forward. It didn't walk the way anything living walks. It transferred, like watching a video skip a frame. One moment there, next moment closer.
It leaned down toward Ne. Ada could see its face. She would never describe it fully, not to anyone. And it was looking at Ne with something that might have been recognition, might have been ownership. Ne raised her hand, slowly, opened her palm, and placed it against the thing's chest, like a greeting, like a ritual, like she had done this 100 times. Ada made a sound. She didn't mean to. a small crushed sound, the kind your body makes when your mind hasn't caught up to what your eyes are showing it. And the thing stopped, turned its head, looked directly at the tree where Ada was hiding, those red eyes in the dark fixed on exactly where she was standing. It saw her. She saw me. Those were the words Ada would use later when she could finally speak again. She said it wrong. She said it the way it felt. Not it saw her. She. Like despite everything, despite its shape, despite its wrongness, there was something female in the intelligence behind those eyes. She saw me. Ada ran. She doesn't know how she kept hold of the lantern. She doesn't know how she found the path back. She ran, and the trees blurred and the air tore at her. And she didn't stop until she was through the back door of the compound, inside, door shut, back against the wall, lantern clutched to her chest like a heartbeat. She sat on the floor for 20 minutes. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep. In the morning, Nek came to breakfast like nothing had happened. She scooped her kamu into her bowl. She asked her mother if there was sugar. She sat across from Ada and ate in silence. Ada watched her the whole time. Finally, when their mother left the room, Ada put down her spoon and said, "Ne." Ne's hand stopped mid-motion for just a second. Then she continued eating. "Ne, I know, Ada. I heard you behind me." Ada's mouth opened. "You heard me and you still went? I always know when you're following me. I just didn't think you'd stay long enough to see."
"What are they?" Ada's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are those things? Why do you go there? Ne, they won't hurt me." "How do you know?" A long silence. Ne pushed her bowl aside and folded her hands on the table. When she looked at Ada again, there was something in her face Ada had never seen there before. Something ancient, something tired. Ne said, "Because I made a promise a long time ago, before either of us understood what promises meant." 4 years earlier, when Ne was 13, she had gone into the forest on a dare. The kind of dare 13-year-olds make, because they haven't yet understood that the world is full of things that take dares seriously. She went in, she saw the things with red eyes, and they had seen her, and she had made a deal. Not because she was foolish, not because she was reckless, but because one of those things, the she one, had shown Ne Ada. It had shown her Ada dying. Specifically, it had shown her Ada dying. A vision, clear and specific and timed. Ada, 3 years from that night, falling into the river during the floods. Ada not surviving. "I bargained," Ne said simply. 1 visit a month, 1 night, in exchange for something that would change the outcome. "You did that for me? You're my sister." Ada stared at her for a long time. "How many more nights?" she finally asked. And Nell looked at the table. 3. "And then it's done? You are free?" That's what she said. "And you trust her?" And Nell looked up. Her expression was something Ada would think about for the rest of her life. Not fear, not certainty, just the particular look of someone who has already chosen
and can no longer unchoose. I trust the deal. I have to. Ada went with her the next night. She didn't hide behind a tree. She walked beside her sister, lantern in hand, jaw locked, every muscle in her body vibrating with the effort of simply moving forward.
The things with red eyes were waiting in the clearing. When Ada stepped into the light, lantern raised, standing at Ne's side, they went still in a way that was different from their ordinary stillness. Charged, calculating. The she-one stepped forward, fixed those red eyes on Ada, and Ada looked back. She did not look away. She would never fully explain how she managed it, how she held that gaze and didn't crumble. She said later it was simple. I thought about what Ne gave up, and I thought if she could walk into this place alone, I can stand in it beside her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the she-one nodded. A slow, deliberate incline of that terrible head, like acknowledgement, like respect, like I see you too, and I accept what I see. The final night, Ne went alone the way she always had. Ada waited at the edge of the forest, at the boundary, lantern lit, awake. At 2:52 a.m., Ne walked back out of the trees.
Her feet were dirty. Her wrapper was damp. But her eyes were hers again, fully, completely, finally hers. She saw Ada standing there in the lantern light, and she stopped walking. And for a moment, she just looked at her older sister, standing at the edge of the dark, holding a light, having wafted. And something crossed her face that had no name in English. Igbo has a word for it. The feeling of being loved so specifically that you feel seen down to your bones. Ne walked to her, and Ada put the lantern down and held her sister like she was the most important thing in the world. Because she was. That was 3 years ago. Ada is 20 now. She crossed the bridge over the river last year's floods with Ne right beside her. She didn't fall. She has talked about that more times than she can count. Whether the deal changed something real, whether Ne's 3 years of 2 a.m. walks actually rewrote a future that was already written. She doesn't know. What she knows is her sister is alive, laughing too loud again, wearing red on wrong days. Her sister is here.
Ada sleeps through the night now, all the way to morning, undisturbed. Except sometimes, at exactly 2 a.m., she wakes up for no reason she can name. And she lies still, and she listens to the dark, and she wonders if whatever made that deal with a 13-year-old girl in a misty clearing is still out there, walking its old paths. She wonders if it ever looks toward the village and remembers her face in the lantern light, the girl who came to stand beside her sister, who looked back and did not flinch. She wonders if somewhere in whatever passes for a heart in a thing like that, it respects her for it. She thinks it does. If you've watched this far, you already know what kind of person you are. You're the kind who stays, the kind who follows, the kind who holds the lantern even when you're terrified,
especially when you're terrified. The forest doesn't scare people like that. It respects them. The next story, what Ene saw on her very first night alone, is the one I've been afraid to tell. I think you're finally ready to hear it.